Mrs. Newland, you have the floor.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Reimer, for that introduction. Thank you also to Uwe Prohl and the BSC Congress President, to Ambassador Sedevi, to the Behörden Spiegel, and of course to Ambassador Emerson and the U.S. Embassy team for hosting all of us today. Ambassador Etienne, thank you for joining us. Our hearts are with everyone in Paris today, and in fact with all those who have lost loved ones in recent weeks, whether in France, in Turkey, in Lebanon, in Iraq, or in the skies over the Sinai en route home to Russia. As has already been said, our gathering here today takes on increasing meaning in the wake of the heinous terror attacks in Paris and elsewhere. When madmen with guns and suicide belts can kill at will in our restaurants, our concert halls, our sports stadiums, our own first thought is, of course, to withdraw, to hug our own loved ones close, and to retreat behind the walls of our homes, and to fight for civilization only in our own immediate environment. But as Mr. Prohl has said, in every generation it now feels that our common humanity has been tested by those who seek to impose their will through fear and violence and eradication of free choice, by those who resort to violence because they cannot succeed in open, tolerant, and democratic societies. No one knows that better than the people of this city, Berlin, who worked for decades to restore dignity and unity and democracy after the bloodiest of wars ripped Berlin in two. So if our own hard-fought transatlantic unity is to mean anything, if we're to live the words of the North Atlantic Treaty, the Treaty of Rome, and the UN Charter, I say to you today, let the terror in Paris call us once again to unite in defense of our security, our freedom, and our democratic values. As many of our leaders underscored yesterday at the G20 meetings in Antalya, we can neither hide from today's threats, nor can any of our nations, any of our people face them alone. Instead, we have to stand together in defense of the same principles that have united us every time we've been called to defeat tyranny together. Our right to live together in peace, in security, in freedom, and in open, tolerant societies. We must advance those principles in our own space and wherever victims of oppression and violence seek our help in defense of their own dignity and their right to live democratically. To many, that aspiration may feel too broad today. They'll say, it's hard enough to protect ourselves. But again, Berlin and Germany know better than most that building walls is not the answer. In the 21st century, we cannot protect ourselves from mayhem by building our own exclusive fortress. It just won't work. As we've seen, the viciousness of ISIL, of Daesh, the suffering in Syria, the violence in eastern Ukraine, the implications of climate change, and the risks of infectious disease, sooner rather than later, they can show up on our own streets. So we have to act, and we have to do it together. It's precisely in times like these when the challenges to our free, democratic world order come at us from every direction and threaten to overwhelm us, financially, militarily, even emotionally, that our unity is most vital. And our democratic values remain our very best guide. America's approach to protecting our values and to advancing a Europe whole, free, and at peace will remain constant, as it has for 70 years. We will use our military when we must. We will use diplomacy whenever we can. We will innovation and our free market economies to advance solutions whenever we can find them. And we will build communities of common action, adding to our traditional alliances whenever possible. The fight against Daesh requires all of this. An evil on this scale must be fought on the battlefield where it seeks to dominate whole populations, and it must be eradicated from our own streets with law enforcement and intelligence collaboration. And we need a holistic response using all the tools at our disposal, from the work we're doing together to deny Daesh territory and to support local forces in Iraq and moderate opposition groups in Syria, to stopping terrorists' ability to profit from illicit oil sales or other forms of finance, to the delicate balance we have to strike at home between law enforcement and in the work we do in law enforcement between security and privacy. In this regard, the work that NATO and EU nations are doing together in the Counter-ISIL coalition, in the International Syria Support Group talks on a diplomatic solution, in New York and through our banks to cut off terrorist finance, and even in the US-EU data privacy and safe harbor discussions, these should all be seen as aspects of the same fight. As the victims of Daesh terror make their way to Jordan, to Lebanon, to Turkey, and to Europe's shores, we must also remember that our common humanity and work together on safe, secure, affordable, and just ways to offer refuge and to share that burden equally among us. In that regard, we applaud Germany's and Chancellor Merkel's leadership as you seek to live the values on which the transatlantic community was forged. Rather than rebuilding walls in Europe, the EU is strongest when it implements a common policy of taking in and processing refugees with the same solidarity it has shown in addressing other crises, whether that was the financial crisis or the Balkan Wars. The US stands ready to support the emerging EU policy and to continue to assist the countries on your periphery that have sought our help. America remains the single largest contributor to the humanitarian effort inside Syria, with $4.5 billion devoted to the cause. We're also supporting Turkey's efforts to care for 2.2 million refugees, with $325 million to help operate over 100 schools and provides shelter, essential supplies, mobile registration centers, medical centers, and safe spaces for children to learn and play. The U.S. is also providing almost $27 million to UNHCR to assist in the care of refugees who are transiting Greece, Macedonia, Serbia, and the rest of Europe. This crisis, like the others that we have weathered, reminds us that we are strongest as a transatlantic community when we live our values, when we share the burden and expense of leadership, and when we balance our diplomatic, military, and economic tools. That was true in the Balkans in the 90s, in Afghanistan after September 11th, in tackling Ebola, and now also as we seek to support Ukraine and defend against Russian aggression to our east. Even as we focus on ISIL, we must not forget that barely 2 years ago, almost 1 million Ukrainians stood for days and weeks in the snow on the Maidan to demand that their government give them what we already have: human dignity, democracy, clean government, and justice. When Yanukovych turned his back on Europe, Ukrainians would not be denied their European choice. But that was unacceptable, both to Yanukovych and to the Kremlin, which met the Ukrainian people's demand with occupation, tanks, Buk missiles, support for separatists, sabotage, and propaganda. Today, 93% of Ukraine survives as a democratic state in association with Europe because Ukrainians fought and died for their rights and for our common values, and because our nation stood with the people of Ukraine. We have given political, economic, and security support. We have imposed successively harsh rounds of sanctions to bring Russia to the negotiating table. And we have supported a diplomatic resolution to the conflict via the Minsk agreements and the Normandy talks led by Germany and France. Now we have to help Ukraine see this through. We have to maintain pressure on Russia and its separatist proxies to complete the unfinished commitments of Minsk, including the return of all hostages, full humanitarian access for UN agencies and NGOs, free, fair elections in Donbass under the Ukrainian constitution and monitored by ODIHR, the removal of all foreign forces and weapons, and the return of the international order to Ukraine. Sanctions are an essential tool for holding Russia accountable. They must be rolled over until Minsk is fully implemented, and we must keep our Crimea sanctions in place until Russia returns the peninsula to its rightful owner. And because the best antidote to Russian aggression and malign influence is Ukraine's success as a democratic, prosperous European state, the Ukrainian government must continue to live up to its promises to its own people and to the international community. Much difficult work remains to clean up endemic corruption throughout the government and society, to stabilize the economy, to break the hold of corrupt state enterprises and oligarchs, and to reform the justice system, including the prosecutor's office. But the will is there. Ukraine's own people are demanding a faster pace of change. We help them most when we condition our own sustained support on Ukraine continuing to clean up its own house. As NATO allies, we are also supporting those countries on the alliance's eastern edge that worry that they could be the Kremlin's next victims. Our persistent military presence on land, sea, and air in Poland, Romania, Bulgaria, and the Baltic states sends a powerful message of deterrence. We call on all allies to continue to contribute generously to this mission, 28 for 28, even as we call on allies in the East to show solidarity with those countries facing security challenges from the South. Unfortunately, none of this is cheap. The threats we face today demand that we meet the pledge that we made to each other in Wales to reverse the slide in our defense budgets and build back to 2% of GDP in every ally capital. Almost 70% of our allies are keeping their word. The other 30% know who they are and need to dig deeper before our next summit in Warsaw in July. The US is doing its part with $1 billion European Reassurance Initiative every year and Operation Atlantic Resolve, which helps us to maintain rotational US presence throughout the region. We're also assisting Turkey, which has been on the front lines of our shared struggle for years in protecting its own citizens and its own space. More broadly, all of our joint efforts become unaffordable when our economies are flat or are contracting. Europe's unity, again led by Germany in tackling the Eurozone crisis, demanded solidarity, rigorous economic analysis, and an honest democratic debate to find the right balance between fiscal discipline and pro-growth strategies. Even as most European economies are growing again, the financial burdens on governments and budgets are also growing, notably as the refugee and migrant crisis brings intense new demands. That's why the United States considers it a security issue as much as an economic issue that we conclude negotiations on the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership in 2016. Not only will TTIP bring jobs and growth on both sides of the Atlantic, it'll strengthen our open free market model and our leadership position in setting the global gold standard in environmental protection, in labor protection, in protection of consumers and workers in trade agreements. As Europe has also recognized, energy policy is also a security issue. America's own growing energy independence has liberated us from the whims of OPEC and other efforts by outside powers to use energy as a lever of influence. We applaud Europe's own work to diversify its sources and types of energy supply and to implement a common strategy. The US is closely coordinating with the EU to advance crucial energy projects that will turn Europe into the energy-rich powerhouse that it deserves to be. These include investments in Kirk Island LNG in Croatia, key interconnectors to Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, Serbia, the TAP pipeline project, and offshore exploration all along the Adriatic. As we redouble our efforts to bring more energy options to our neighborhood, we must also be vigilant defenders of our energy security. Any effort to drag Europe back into single-source energy dependence undercuts our strength and our sovereignty. From Nord Stream to Turk Stream, the risks are the same. Our democratic values are no less important, including in our own space, and we must make sure that our own governments remain clean, transparent, and open. From the Balkans to Central Europe and Eastern Europe, we have to accelerate our fight against corruption and democratic backsliding. And across the transatlantic community, on both sides of the Atlantic, we have to resist the siren song of politicians who pit so-called traditional values against universal values, who run for office on fear, on exclusion, on closing markets, rather than commanding the community of peace, security, free markets, and tolerance. We can only beat today's evils when people everywhere stand up and reject extremism, violence as a weapon of politics, and walls of any kind. Physical walls, trade walls, racial or ethnic walls. Whether we're talking about Ukraine, strengthening NATO, improving global security, working together to defeat terror, strengthening our prosperity and our free market way of life, the United States, Canada, and Europe need each other now more than ever. We, the transatlantic community, are strongest, safest, and most prosperous when we stand together against today's evils and challenges, and when we live our values at home and support them globally. Friday's victims in Paris, the latest in our decades-long struggle together for human decency and dignity, deserve no less from us. Nous sommes unis. Thank you.